The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood by the tall windows of their private quarters. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal was broken, but the words inside felt like they were written in a foreign language. William sat across the room, his head buried in his hands, shoulders shaking with grief that he tried so hard to hide from the world. The news had spread like wildfire through the palace corridors. Staff members whispered in hushed tones, their faces pale with worry. Something terrible had happened. Something that would change everything for the royal family and the entire nation. Catherine walked slowly toward her husband, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension that had built up over the past few weeks. "We have to tell the children," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. William looked up, his eyes red and swollen. The man who always appeared so strong and composed in public was broken, vulnerable in a way that only Catherine had ever seen. He nodded slowly, understanding that their 3 children would need to hear the truth from them, not from news reports or palace staff. Outside their window, the grounds of Windsor Castle looked peaceful and normal. Gardeners continued their work, security guards walked their usual routes, and tourists gathered at the gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. None of them knew what was happening behind the castle walls. None of them could imagine the pain that was tearing through the hearts of William and Catherine. The couple had faced many challenges since their wedding day, but nothing had prepared them for this moment. They had learned to handle public scrutiny, media criticism, and the endless demands of royal duty. They had grown stronger together through scandals, family disagreements, and personal struggles. But this was different. This was something that would test not just their marriage, but their very souls. Catherine remembered the early days of their relationship, when they were just university students trying to figure out their future together. William had warned her then about the difficulties of royal life, about the sacrifices she would have to make and the pain she would sometimes have to endure. She had thought she understood, but now she realized that some kinds of suffering could never be fully prepared for. The letter in her hand contained details that would soon become public knowledge. The royal family's private secretary had written it carefully, using formal language to describe something that felt deeply personal and devastating. Every word was chosen to maintain dignity and protocol, but beneath the official tone, Catherine could sense the writer's own shock and sadness. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the world that would soon learn their terrible news. He thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and how she had faced countless crises during her long reign. She had always shown remarkable strength and composure, never letting the public see her personal pain. But William wondered if he could do the same. Could he stand before cameras and microphones and speak calmly about something that was destroying him from the inside? The sound of footsteps in the hallway reminded them that their private moment would soon end. Royal advisors, government officials, and media specialists would arrive to discuss how to handle the announcement. There would be meetings, press releases, and carefully planned public appearances. Every word they spoke would be analyzed, every expression photographed and studied. The world would watch their every move, looking for signs of weakness or strength. Catherine folded the letter carefully and placed it on the desk. She had read it so many times that she knew every word by heart, but she still couldn't fully accept what it meant. The implications were enormous, not just for their family, but for the entire nation. People would look to them for leadership and comfort during this difficult time, but how could they offer strength when they felt so broken themselves? The princess walked to their bedroom and began choosing clothes for the day ahead. Everything had to be perfect. The color, the style, the message it would send. Even in their darkest moments, royal protocol demanded attention to such details. She selected a simple black dress, knowing that it would soon become one of the most photographed outfits in royal history. William joined her, straightening his tie and checking his appearance in the mirror. They had done this routine countless times before important events, but today felt different. Today they were preparing to face the world while their hearts were breaking. They would have to smile when necessary, speak clearly when their voices wanted to crack, and maintain composure when every instinct told them to collapse. As they prepared to leave their private quarters, Catherine took one last look around the room that had been their sanctuary. The family photos on the dresser, the children's drawings stuck to the mirror, the books they had been reading together. Everything looked the same. but nothing would ever be the same again. This room had witnessed their happiest moments and their deepest conversations, and now it had become the place where their world had changed forever. The couple walked hand in hand toward the door, knowing that once they stepped outside, they would belong to the nation again. Their private grief would become public property, their personal pain a matter of state concern. But in this moment, they were still just William and Catherine, two people facing the greatest challenge of their lives together, drawing strength from their love for each other and their commitment to serve their country, even when service meant sacrificing their own comfort and privacy. The grand dining room at Kensington Palace felt unusually quiet as William and Catherine sat with their 3 children for what might be their last normal family breakfast for a very long time. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis ate their cereal and toast, chatting about school assignments and weekend plans, completely unaware that their parents were struggling to hold back tears. Catherine watched her eldest son as he talked excitedly about his upcoming football match. George had his father's eyes and his grandmother Diana's gentle spirit. At just 10 years old, he was already showing signs of the responsibility that would one day rest on his shoulders. But today, Catherine wanted to protect him from that weight just a little longer. Princess Charlotte, 8 years old and full of energy, was telling a story about her art class when she noticed her mother's distant expression. The little girl had always been remarkably perceptive, often sensing emotions that adults tried to hide. She stopped mid-sentence and looked carefully at both her parents. "Mommy, are you sad about something?" Charlotte asked, her small voice filled with concern that broke Catherine's heart. The princess forced a smile and reached over to smooth her daughter's hair. "I'm just thinking about some grown-up things, sweetheart," Catherine replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Charlotte wasn't satisfied with that answer. She had inherited her great-grandmother Queen Elizabeth's sharp intelligence and her father's determination. She studied her parents' faces, noticing the redness around their eyes and the way they kept glancing at each other with worried expressions. Young Prince Louis, only 5 years old, continued eating happily, occasionally making silly faces that would normally make his parents laugh. Today, William and Catherine smiled at his antics, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The innocence of their youngest child reminded them of how much their family's life was about to change. After breakfast, William and Catherine walked their children to the car that would take them to school. The routine felt surreal, as if they were acting in a play while their real lives crumbled around them. They hugged each child a little tighter than usual, kissed them a little longer, knowing that when the children came home, everything would be different. As the car disappeared down the long driveway, Catherine finally allowed the tears she had been holding back all morning to fall. William put his arms around her, and for several minutes they stood together in the palace courtyard, two people facing an impossible situation while trying to be strong for everyone who depended on them. The palace staff had been working since dawn to prepare for the day ahead. Press secretaries were writing statements, security teams were updating protocols, and household staff were preparing for the flood of visitors, officials, and media representatives who would soon arrive. Everyone moved with quiet efficiency, but there was a heaviness in the air that affected every person in the building. Mrs. Henderson, the children's longtime nanny, approached the couple carefully. She had been with the family for years, and had become more like a grandmother to the children than an employee. Her eyes were also red from crying, and she struggled to find the right words. "Your Royal Highnesses," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "I want you to know that whatever happens, the children will be surrounded by love and support. We'll all work together to help them through this difficult time." Catherine hugged the older woman tightly, grateful for her kindness and dedication. Mrs. Henderson had been there for all the important moments in their children's lives. First steps, lost teeth, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. Now she would help them through something much more challenging. The first meeting of the day was with senior palace officials who had been summoned from across London. They gathered in the same room where previous generations of royals had faced their own crises. The walls were lined with portraits of kings and queens who had weathered wars, scandals, and personal tragedies while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. Sir Edward Pemberton, the Queen's private secretary, entered the room with a stack of documents and a grave expression. He had served the royal family for over 20 years, and had helped navigate some of their most difficult moments. But even his experience couldn't make this situation any easier. "Their Royal Highnesses," he began formally, "we need to discuss the timing and content of the official announcement. The media has already begun asking questions, and we cannot delay much longer." William nodded, understanding that their private pain would soon become public knowledge. He thought about his mother, Princess Diana, and how the media had dissected every moment of her struggles. He was determined to protect his family's privacy as much as possible, while still fulfilling his duty to inform the nation. Catherine listened as the officials discussed press releases, interview schedules, and security arrangements. The words seemed to float around her without really sinking in. All she could think about was how to explain to 3 young children why their world was about to change so dramatically. The meeting continued for hours, with everyone trying to plan for every possible scenario. Phone calls were made to government officials, religious leaders, and Commonwealth representatives. The machinery of the monarchy was slowly grinding into action, but behind all the formal protocols were real people dealing with real pain. During a brief break, William and Catherine stepped out onto a private balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves on the ancient oak trees were turning brilliant shades of gold and red. It was the kind of day that would normally fill them with joy and gratitude for their beautiful life together. "Do you remember when we used to dream about having a quiet, normal life?" Catherine asked, watching a groundskeeper rake leaves in the distance. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just disappear and be ordinary people for a while." William took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We can't change who we are or what's expected of us," he replied. "But we can face this together just like we've faced everything else. Our love for each other and for our children will carry us through." As they stood together on that balcony, watching the peaceful scene below, they both knew that these might be their last moments of relative calm for a very long time. Soon they would have to return to the meeting, make difficult decisions, and begin the process of sharing their private tragedy with an entire nation that looked to them for stability and hope. The black sedan moved slowly through the streets of London as William and Catherine made their way to Buckingham Palace for the most difficult conversation of their lives. Inside the car they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they were about to face. The city bustled around them with normal life continuing, completely unaware that history was about to change. King Charles III was waiting for them in his private study, the same room where monarchs had made crucial decisions for generations. The walls were lined with leather-bound books and family photographs that told the story of the royal family's long history. But today, those images felt heavy with the weight of tradition and responsibility. The king rose from his desk as his son and daughter-in-law entered. His face showed the strain of the past few days, but he embraced them both with the tenderness of a father, rather than the formality of a monarch. In this private moment, they were simply a family dealing with an unimaginable crisis. "I've been thinking all night about how to handle this," Charles began, his voice hoarse from emotion and lack of sleep. "There's no precedent for something like this, no protocol that can guide us through what's coming." Catherine sank into one of the antique chairs, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. She had married into the royal family knowing that her life would be public, but she had never imagined having to share something so deeply personal with the entire world. The thought of cameras capturing her grief, of strangers analyzing her every expression, made her feel sick. William paced near the window, looking out at the tourists and protesters who always gathered outside the palace gates. Soon those crowds would grow much larger. News vans would line the streets, reporters would set up camp, and the whole world would be watching their family's most private moments play out in public. "The children don't know yet," William said quietly. "We wanted to speak with you first, to understand how this will affect everyone before we try to explain it to them." The king nodded, understanding the impossible position his son and daughter-in-law were in. As a father himself, he knew the instinct to protect one's children from pain and confusion. But as the monarch, he also understood that some burdens could not be avoided, some duties could not be delegated. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Queen Camilla entered carrying a tea service, her own eyes showing the strain of recent days. She had become a stabilizing presence in the royal family, offering practical wisdom and emotional support during difficult times. Today her calm demeanor was especially welcome. "I thought you might need some refreshment," she said gently, setting down the tray and pouring tea with steady hands. The simple act of sharing tea felt almost normal, a small comfort in the midst of chaos. Catherine accepted the warm cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around it for comfort rather than warmth. The familiar ritual reminded her of countless family gatherings, happy occasions when they had all sat together discussing pleasant news and future plans. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different lifetime. "We need to think about the statement," Charles said, returning to the practical matters at hand. "Every word will be scrutinized, analyzed, and debated. We must be completely honest with the people, but we also need to maintain some boundaries around our family's privacy." William sat down beside his wife, taking her free hand in his. They had faced media storms before, but nothing that would compare to this. Every detail of their lives would be examined, every past decision questioned, every future move predicted and analyzed by experts who had never walked in their shoes. "What about the Commonwealth countries?" Catherine asked, thinking about the millions of people around the world who looked to the British royal family for stability and continuity. "How do we explain this to children in schools, to elderly people who have never known anything different?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the global impact of their personal crisis. The royal family wasn't just a British institution. They were symbols of tradition and stability for people across the world. Their pain would become the world's concern. Their decisions would affect millions of lives. Queen Camilla moved to sit near Catherine, offering the kind of motherly comfort that the younger woman desperately needed. "You don't have to carry this burden alone," she said softly. "The whole family will stand with you, and the people will understand more than you think. They've always loved you both for your honesty and your humanity." Outside the study, they could hear the sounds of the palace preparing for the day ahead. Staff members were answering phones that rang constantly. Secretaries were coordinating with government offices, and security teams were reviewing protocols for the increased attention that was coming. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering every aspect of how to handle the announcement and its aftermath. They discussed timing, locations, and the specific words that would be used. Every detail mattered. Every decision could have lasting consequences for the monarchy and the nation. As the meeting neared its end, Catherine felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief that the secret would finally be shared, that they wouldn't have to carry this burden alone anymore. But terror about what would come next, about how their lives would change once the world knew their truth. William stood up and walked to a portrait of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, that hung prominently on the wall. The late queen had faced her own share of crises during her long reign, always maintaining dignity and composure even in the most difficult circumstances. He drew strength from her memory, hoping to honor her example in the challenging days ahead. "She would have known what to do," he said quietly, more to himself than to the others in the room. His father joined him at the portrait, both men looking up at the image of the woman who had guided them through so many challenges. "She would have reminded us that duty comes first, but that compassion and authenticity matter just as much," Charles replied. "She would have told us to trust the people's capacity for understanding and forgiveness." As they prepared to leave the study, Catherine took one last look around the room where so many important decisions had been made. Soon, she and William would return to Kensington Palace to collect their children and begin the most difficult conversation of their parenting lives. The thought made her stomach tighten with anxiety, but she also felt a growing determination to face whatever came with courage and grace. The three adults embraced once more before William and Catherine left for their car. As they walked through the palace corridors, past paintings of previous monarchs and their families, they both felt the weight of history and tradition pressing down on them. But they also felt the strength that comes from facing the truth together, supported by family and sustained by love. The children's voices echoed through the hallways of Kensington Palace as they returned from school, their backpacks dragging behind them, and their faces bright with the excitement of sharing their day. Prince George was explaining a science experiment to his younger siblings, while Princess Charlotte interrupted with her own stories about drama class. Prince Louis ran ahead, eager to find his parents and show them a drawing he had made. Catherine stood in the doorway of the family sitting room, watching her children's innocent joy and feeling her heart break a little more. In just a few minutes, she and William would have to tell them news that would change their understanding of their family and their future. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any royal duty she had ever faced. William appeared beside her, having changed from his formal suit into casual clothes that the children would find more comforting. They had decided to have this conversation in the room, where the family spent their happiest times together, surrounded by comfortable furniture, family photos, and the children's artwork that decorated every available surface. "Mummy, Daddy," Louis called out, running toward them with his arms outstretched. Catherine scooped him up, holding him close and breathing in his familiar scent of soap and childhood sweetness. For a moment she allowed herself to pretend that everything was normal, that this was just another ordinary afternoon. George and Charlotte followed more slowly, both children seeming to sense that something was different about their parents' mood. Charlotte in particular watched her mother's face carefully, her young mind already trying to understand what was happening. "Can we all sit together for a few minutes?" William asked, settling into his favorite armchair. "Mummy and I have something important we need to talk to you about." The children arranged themselves around their parents, with Louis curled up in Catherine's lap and George and Charlotte sitting on the sofa facing them. The room fell quiet except for the ticking of an antique clock that had been a wedding gift from Queen Elizabeth. Catherine looked at William, drawing strength from his steady presence. They had rehearsed this conversation during the drive home, but now that the moment had arrived, all their carefully planned words seemed inadequate. How do you explain to children that their world is about to change in ways they cannot yet understand? "You know how much Daddy and I love you," Catherine began, her voice soft but steady. "And you know that being part of our family means that sometimes we have responsibilities that other families don't have." The children nodded, already familiar with the concept of royal duties and public appearances. They had grown up understanding that their lives were different from their classmates, that cameras sometimes followed them, and that their behavior mattered to people they had never met. "Something has happened that affects our whole family," William continued, leaning forward to make eye contact with each child. "It's something that will be difficult for all of us, but we're going to face it together." George, the oldest, straightened in his seat with a maturity that reminded both parents of William at the same age. Even as a child, William had understood that his position came with both privileges and burdens. Now George was beginning to learn the same lesson. "Are you getting divorced?" Charlotte asked suddenly, her voice small and worried. Sarah's parents got divorced and she had to move to a different house. The question surprised both William and Catherine, reminding them how much children notice and worry about things adults assume they don't understand. Catherine reached out to take Charlotte's hand, squeezing it gently. "No, sweetheart," she said firmly. "Daddy and I love each other very much and we're not getting divorced. This is about something different, something that affects our whole family's future." Louis, not fully understanding the conversation but sensing the seriousness of the moment, snuggled closer to his mother. His small fingers played with the pearls of her necklace, a gesture that had always comforted him during bedtime stories or when he felt worried. William took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would begin changing his children's lives forever. "There's been an accident," he said quietly. "Someone very important to our family has been hurt badly, and it means that things are going to be different for all of us." The children absorbed this information in different ways. George's face became very serious as he tried to process what his father was telling him. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears even though she didn't fully understand what had happened. Louis looked back and forth between his parents, sensing their sadness and becoming more clingy. "Is it Great-Grandpa?" George asked, thinking of King Charles and remembering recent conversations about his age and health. "No, darling," Catherine replied, grateful that the most obvious guess was incorrect. "Great-Grandpa is fine. This is about someone else, someone who's been very important to our family for a long time." The conversation continued slowly, with William and Catherine carefully sharing age-appropriate details, while trying to preserve some of their children's innocence. They explained that there would be more cameras, more attention, and probably some changes to their daily routines. They promised that school would continue normally and that their friends and activities would remain as unchanged as possible. Charlotte, with her characteristic directness, asked the question that both parents had been dreading. "Are you sad? You both look like you've been crying." The honesty of the question, delivered with such innocent concern, broke down the last of Catherine's composure. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes, sweetheart," William answered for both of them. We are very sad about what happened. Sometimes grown-ups cry when sad things happen, just like children do. It's okay to feel sad when someone we love is hurt. George, showing wisdom beyond his years, moved from the sofa to stand beside his father's chair. Without saying anything, he put his small hand on William's shoulder, offering comfort in the same way he had seen adults do during difficult times. The gesture was so mature and caring that it made William's own tears start flowing. In that moment, he realized that his eldest son was beginning to understand not just the privileges of their position, but also the responsibilities and sorrows that came with it. As the afternoon wore on, the children asked more questions, some practical and some heartbreaking in their simplicity. They wanted to know if they would still have Christmas together, if their pets would be okay, and if they would still be able to visit their friends. Each question reminded their parents of how much these young lives would be affected by circumstances completely beyond their control. Mrs. Henderson appeared quietly in the doorway, her own eyes red from crying, but her manner as calm and professional as always. She had prepared the children's favorite snacks and drinks, understanding that normal routines and comfort foods could help during emotional conversations. The family spent the rest of the afternoon together, with no scheduled appearances or royal duties to interrupt their time. They played quiet games, looked at photo albums, and simply held each other when words weren't enough. Outside, the world was beginning to change as news of their situation started to spread. But inside their sitting room, they were just a family, learning to face an impossible challenge together. The morning of the announcement arrived with gray skies and a chill in the air that seemed to match the mood inside Buckingham Palace. Catherine stood before her dressing room mirror, adjusting her black dress for the third time, trying to achieve the impossible balance between appearing strong for the nation and honest about her grief. Her hands shook slightly as she fastened her grandmother's pearl earrings, a small connection to happier times. William appeared behind her in the mirror, already dressed in his formal suit, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night. They had rehearsed their statement dozens of times, but both knew that no amount of preparation could truly ready them for what they were about to face. In just 2 hours, they would stand before the world's media and share news that would change everything. The palace buzzed with unprecedented activity. Security teams had been working since dawn to manage the crowds of journalists, photographers, and television crews that had gathered outside. Phone lines rang constantly as reporters from every major news organization sought additional information. The world sensed that something significant was happening, and everyone wanted to be the first to understand what it meant. In the breakfast room, the children ate their cereal quietly, aware that this day was different from all others. They had been told they would stay home from school, watched by Mrs. Henderson and their security team, while their parents attended to important business. The unusual disruption to their routine only reinforced the gravity of the situation. Prince George, mature beyond his 10 years, asked few questions but observed everything. He noticed the extra security guards, the constant phone calls, and the tension in every adult face. Princess Charlotte clung more closely to her parents than usual, her natural intuition telling her that something was about to change their lives forever. Little Prince Louis played with his toys, occasionally looking up to make sure his parents were still nearby. "When will you be back?" Charlotte asked as Catherine knelt to hug her goodbye. "Before dinner," Catherine promised, though she had no real idea what the day would bring. "Mrs. Henderson will take good care of you and we'll be together this evening." The car ride to the palace felt both too long and too short. William and Catherine sat hand in hand, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them. They passed crowds of people who had gathered along the route, some holding flowers, others simply standing in respectful silence. Word had somehow spread that something important was happening, even though the official announcement was still hours away. At Buckingham Palace, they were met by a team of advisors, press secretaries, and government officials who had been working around the clock to coordinate the announcement. The formal statement had been approved by senior government ministers and carefully reviewed by legal experts to ensure every word was appropriate for such a momentous occasion. Sir Edward Pemberton, the Queen's private secretary, briefed them one final time on the logistics of the press conference. Camera positions had been carefully planned, security arrangements were in place, and contingency plans had been prepared for every possible scenario. But beneath all the formal protocols, everyone understood that they were witnessing history in the making. "Remember," Sir Edward said gently, "you don't have to answer every question. Say what you need to say, then leave with dignity. The nation will understand and respect your need for privacy during this difficult time." Catherine nodded, grateful for the reminder that she and William retained some control over this impossible situation. They would share what they needed to share, but they didn't owe the world every detail of their private pain. The walk to the palace's main entrance felt surreal. The same corridors that had witnessed countless royal announcements, from declarations of war to celebrations of peace, now echoed with their footsteps as they approached their own moment of truth. Portraits of previous monarchs seemed to watch from their frames, silent witnesses to another chapter in the long story of the British royal family. Outside, the crowd of media representatives was larger than anyone had expected. Photographers jostled for position, television reporters spoke urgently into their cameras, and the clicking of camera shutters created a constant background noise. The entire world was watching, waiting to understand what had brought such gravity to the faces of the beloved prince and princess. William and Catherine paused for a moment at the palace doors, taking deep breaths and drawing strength from each other's presence. In just minutes, their private tragedy would become public knowledge, dissected and analyzed by experts who had never walked in their shoes. But they also knew that sharing their burden might bring some relief, and that the nation's support could help carry them through the darkest days ahead. "Are you ready?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine squeezed his hand and nodded, though she knew that no one could ever truly be ready for such a moment. "We'll face this together just like everything else," she replied, echoing words they had spoken to each other through many previous challenges. The doors opened, and they stepped into the harsh glare of camera lights and the intense scrutiny of the world's attention. The crowd of reporters fell silent as they approached the podium, understanding that they were about to witness something extraordinary and heartbreaking. William stepped forward first, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, the familiar words of royal protocol providing some comfort in the midst of chaos. "The Princess of Wales and I have asked you to gather here so that we can share some very difficult news with the nation and the Commonwealth." The silence was absolute, as hundreds of people strained to hear every word. Catherine stood beside her husband, her own composure barely holding as she prepared to face the most challenging moment of her public life. In homes, offices, and public spaces around the world, people stopped what they were doing to listen to words that would change their understanding of the royal family forever. "It is with the heaviest of hearts," William continued, his voice beginning to crack with emotion, "that we must inform you of a tragedy that has affected our family profoundly. This morning we learned that—" The pause seemed to last forever as William gathered the strength to continue. Catherine moved slightly closer to him, their shared grief evident to everyone watching. In that moment, they were not the Prince and Princess of Wales, future King and Queen. They were simply two people facing the most difficult day of their lives, supported by their love for each other and their commitment to serve their country even in their darkest hour. The words that followed would be replayed countless times, analyzed by experts and remembered by historians as one of the most emotional moments in modern royal history. But for William and Catherine, standing together in front of the world, they were simply the truth that needed to be spoken, no matter how much it hurt to say the words aloud. The words hung in the air like a physical presence as William finished delivering the announcement that would forever change how the world saw the royal family. Catherine stood beside him, her composure finally breaking as tears streamed down her face, no longer hidden from the cameras that captured every moment of their shared grief. The silence from the assembled media was deafening, as seasoned reporters found themselves too moved to immediately respond with questions. The news spread across the globe within minutes. Television networks interrupted regular programming, newspaper websites crashed from traffic, and social media exploded with messages of shock, sympathy, and support. In living rooms, offices, and public spaces around the world, people watched the replay of that moment when two of the most photographed people on Earth revealed their deepest vulnerability to humanity. Back at Kensington Palace, the children watched their parents on television, finally understanding why this day had been so different from all others. Mrs. Henderson sat with them, ready to answer questions or offer comfort as needed. Prince George watched with a serious expression that was becoming his trademark, while Princess Charlotte reached for the nanny's hand, seeking reassurance that her parents would be okay. The drive home from Buckingham Palace was quiet, with William and Catherine holding hands as they processed what they had just shared with the world. Through the car windows, they could see people gathering on street corners, some holding flowers, others simply standing in respectful silence. The weight of their announcement was already rippling through the nation like stones thrown into still water. Catherine felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. The secret that had been eating away at them for days was finally out in the open. No more carefully worded statements, no more avoiding direct questions, no more pretending that everything was normal when their world had been turned upside down. But with that relief came the realization that their private grief was now public property, subject to analysis and commentary from people who had never walked in their shoes. "The children will have questions," William said softly, breaking the silence in the car. "They'll hear things at school, see things on the internet. We need to be ready to help them understand not just what happened, but what it means for our family going forward." Catherine nodded, thinking about how their announcement would affect 3 young lives that were already so different from their peers. George, Charlotte, and Louis would grow up with this moment as part of their family history, a defining event that would shape how they understood their roles and responsibilities as members of the royal family. When they arrived at Kensington Palace, the children were waiting in the main hall, having watched the announcement on television with Mrs. Henderson. Prince Louis ran to his parents immediately, not fully understanding what had happened but sensing their need for comfort. George and Charlotte approached more cautiously, their young faces showing a mixture of concern and confusion. "We saw you on television," Charlotte said quietly, studying her mother's tear-stained face. Everyone looked very sad. Catherine knelt down to her daughter's level, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "Sometimes grown-ups have to share sad news with lots of people," she explained. "It doesn't make the sadness go away, but it means we don't have to carry it all by ourselves anymore." The family spent the evening together in their private sitting room, away from the cameras and the constant phone calls that were now part of their reality. They ordered pizza instead of having a formal dinner, watched animated movies that required no serious thought, and simply held each other when words weren't enough. Outside their windows, the world was responding to their announcement in ways they could never have imagined. Flowers began appearing at the gates of all the royal palaces, left by people who wanted to show their support for a family that had shared their most vulnerable moment with the nation. Social media filled with messages of love and encouragement, many from people sharing their own stories of loss and resilience. The children's school had already been contacted by palace officials, and special arrangements were being made to protect their privacy while allowing them to maintain as normal a routine as possible. Teachers were briefed on how to handle questions from other students, and additional security measures were quietly put in place. As the days passed, William and Catherine discovered that their honest sharing of grief had created an unexpected connection with people from all walks of life. Letters poured in from around the world, not just from heads of state and celebrities, but from ordinary families who had faced their own tragedies and found strength in seeing the royal couple's humanity. One letter, from an elderly woman in Scotland who had lost her own husband years earlier, particularly touched Catherine. "Your tears on television reminded me that grief is the price we pay for love," the woman had written. "By showing your pain so honestly, you've given permission for the rest of us to feel our own sorrows without shame." The royal couple began to understand that their willingness to be vulnerable had not diminished their standing with the public, but had actually strengthened it. People related to them not as distant figures on pedestals, but as fellow human beings navigating the same emotions and challenges that touch every family. William found himself thinking about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and how she had maintained such dignity throughout her own trials. But he also realized that dignity didn't always mean hiding emotion. Sometimes the most dignified thing you could do was acknowledge your humanity and trust others to respond with compassion. The children adapted to their new reality with the resilience that had always amazed their parents. George took on an even more protective role with his younger siblings, while Charlotte used her natural empathy to comfort classmates who approached her with their own family worries. Louis, still too young to fully understand, simply continued to offer his pure, uncomplicated love to everyone around him. Months later, as the immediate crisis passed and life began to find a new normal, Catherine would look back on that difficult day as a turning point, not just for their family but for the monarchy itself. By choosing honesty over protocol, vulnerability over perfection, They had shown that strength could coexist with sorrow, and that true leadership sometimes meant admitting you didn't have all the answers. The nation had watched them break down and seen them slowly rebuild, not as untouchable symbols of perfection, but as real people facing real challenges with grace, love, and an unshakable commitment to each other and to the people they served. In their darkest hour, William and Catherine had discovered that sharing their tears with the nation had not made them weaker, but had revealed a strength they never knew they possessed. Their story became one that families across the country would reference in their own difficult moments, proof that even the most devastating news could be faced with dignity when you weren't facing it alone. The silent tears that had once threatened to destroy them had instead become a bridge connecting them to the hearts of people everywhere, turning their private tragedy into a shared human experience that brought comfort to countless others walking their own difficult paths.